Well, hello there. We have a lot of catching up to do, and you'll notice that we're doing this in the sewing area of my basement, and that's because when we hired roofers last year to fix a leak from the chimney, yeah, not so fixed. It's the reason why my projector's behind me, and you just can't see the rest of the clutter around me. So, if you're new to the channel, hi, I'm Mare, and I sew and I play with string. Mostly knitting, but sometimes crochet or tatting or whatever else tickles my fancy, like embroidery or cross stitch. Basically, if it's string adjacent, I'll find a use for it. Occasionally, I dabble in time travel, and apparently weatherproofing. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. Good news is that the roofers have been contacted and they've put in a temporary solution until the permanent fix, so chatty stuff will be done here or up in the living room until things dry out. Luckily, I moved furniture and got buckets in place pretty quickly. It's just carpet and concrete and some plywood to keep an eye on. Needless to say, while it's good we found out that the house needed more work, we could have done without the 3 or 4 solid days of rain that accompanied the revelation. And it figures that the month would end that way because May was just an absolute whirlwind. It was completely front-loaded with things that needed to get done, and the rest was basically administration and recovery. Until the rain, that is. Honestly, up till then, aside from the Ujamaa Grandma's thrift sale and making the twig and tail willow top, I think the most exciting thing that happened was taking back about 6 months worth of recycling all at once and seeing all the cans whirling around the conveyor system that they use. Kind of a metaphor for my month. I overstressed something in 1 foot while doing the willow top reveal footage, possibly because it was almost back-to-back with the thrift sale and thus have been plunked on my butt on the sofa, mostly editing for the past month. I got 1 sock done, mostly during my video gaming time in the evening. So, sock number 1. And working my way down the toe on sock number 2. I'm actually surprised how well I did with the mystery sock. I'd hoped to be finished, but it was getting rather bleak when I'd gotten to the 25th and had to tink back the sew on sock number 1 because I'd miscalculated for the thickness of the yarn. So I've now turned the heel on sock number 2, which is a happy accident. I took a little time out to watch YouTube and knit, and we reached a part of the story in Final Fantasy XIV where, aside from one big combat sequence, it was almost all one big movie leading into Shadowbringers, which is where we are now. So a lot of this work got done on the sock in a short amount of time, and that just makes me happy. Because I'd started May about 8 days late, so I was already down over a week of time to even get this far. Reminder that this is my personal mystery project of the month for May, Ancient Arts Yarns Socknado in Get Off My Lawn. Knitting these for the husband, so very vanilla sock with an Eye of Partridge heel, just to keep things a little bit more interesting. He wears through socks pretty quickly in warm sock season, which it currently is not, though we're having a bit of a cold, rainy stretch to even out the heat wave, so he's going to be all set for fall. I'm still working on getting my dice system in place for the grand sock experiment, so we may yet get to using the circular sock machine. I have a list as long as my arm that I want to get done, and the past few months I've mentioned a few of those things only to not get them done for whatever reason. Usually it's because I have to reprioritize things on the fly, and the want gets replaced by need. So instead, I'm going to try to whip out the camera more often on a weekly basis, and we'll see if we can make smaller videos more often, rather than saving things up for the end of the month and getting frustrated because I didn't film things in action. That was my dilemma last week. I went to edit the May video, looked back at the footage, and after trying to edit a rambly mess of an intro, 3 repetitive updates, and a strange jazz odyssey of a Ujamaa Grandma's recap, kind of gave up. Let's just say it did not spark joy. So I decided to bin the whole thing and just try to concentrate on the now. Will I do a brief Ujamaa Grandma's recap? Yes. In fact, that's coming up. I just want to organize it a bit. My last attempt was filled with a lot of pauses and sidetracks into other topics, so I want to take another look at everything and figure out what I want to say, so that's what we're going to do in today's video. There's a lot of things up in the air right now for this month, but I do know that I have a vintage machine I want to test out, another that I want to repair, a shirt to make for the husband, something summery for myself, and try to get some knitting or crochet done. I think that sounds vague enough. Not that I'm trying to be mysterious. I'm just trying not to make promises that I can't keep. So let's open up the June mystery project. Because everything's all over the place, I pre-selected. And we'll see what this month's priority will be, okay? It's Christmas in June. Hair all over the place. This one's an easy one to open. I didn't use too much tape. Aha! We get to try out Polka Dot Creek self-striping sock set in Ghoul Friend, Ghoul Friend, with Twilight. So the purpley stuff would be Ghoul Friend, and the bluey stuff will be Twilight. So I think we might actually get around to using that circular sock machine this month. Yay! All right. So before we go on, if you enjoy sewing, yarn crafts, and the occasional bits of time travel, I'd just like to ask you to boop the like button and maybe see if you're subscribed. I'd also like to thank the Craft Coven, my supporters on Patreon and channel memberships, who are the reason these videos are possible. If memberships aren't for you, that's A-okay. I'd just love it if you could stay to the end, maybe keep me company. There's a big bin of stuff from the thrift sale that I need to unpack. Put my hair up so that it wouldn't get all over the place while we're taking a look at this stuff. Hopefully it's not sticking up all over the place. As I mentioned earlier, the Ujamaa Grandma's Thrift Sale was on May 1st. It's a local Calgary charity that fundraises for the Stephen Lewis Foundation. I donated 6 big garbage bags full of acrylic from my and my late mother's stashes, so I'm hopeful that everything found a good home where it will be appreciated and, most important, used. Last year I bought quite a bit of fabric at the thrift sale, and I really lucked out on some Blue Moon fiber art socks that rock sock yarn. One of my favorite pairs of pants that I made last year, it's from fabric from the thrift sale. So this year was just a little bit different. The first section, as always, is the quilting section. That's the section right next to the entryway, and I picked up a small package of charm squares, mostly dark and blacks, and a few fat quarters. There's about 4 of them in here. This was also stuck to something that I picked up, so I don't think that they actually charged me for this. And a couple of block of the month kits that didn't include any instructions. I also couldn't find any mention of them online anywhere, so the fabric will join my general patchwork bin if I get the urge to crazy quilt again, which is always a possibility. That's probably where we'll find these. Next was heavyweight fabrics like canvas and upholstery. I found a couple of fun things to pick up. The stripe, this one, it's pretty self-explanatory, very Beetlejuice. The pandas, they spark joy. I thought they'd maybe make some fun corset panels, but now I'm thinking either a tote bag or a project bag. It's funny because when I picked these up, the people that I went to the thrift sale with knew immediately that this would get used for something. It was like, oh yeah, very Beetlejuice. This was like, why would you want pandas? I don't know, they're gothy bears. I dipped my toes into the big general fabric area and took a brief wander through the specialty fabric. Came out with a couple of knits. So I'm always a little worried that I've accidentally picked up bathing suit fabric when I buy knits, but I think both of these will make okay tops. This one feels like a somewhat thicker fabric. I don't know, maybe for leggings, but maybe a heavier jersey knit top. This one just feels heavy, and I wish I knew why. It's also a little bit more ribbed. It's got more of a ribbed texture to it. So I don't know. Not a lot of fabric for me this year. As it is, I have some of my own fabric that I need to use or shuffle off to the thrift sale next year. Almost forgot this one. Found this. It's a very light suiting, like extremely light suiting, more of a shirting. I saw this and I went, hey, you know what would be kind of cool? I'm making the willow top. Maybe I should make it with something that you wouldn't think to make a cottagecore type top with. Something that's a little bit more like a classy stripe that you would find in your office. Because this is basically a check with a bit of peach striping going through it. And yeah, that didn't fly with my friends. They were like, maybe you should just make a pair of pants out of it and then make a willow top to go with it. Not as much fun. I kind of like the dichotomy of, you know, it's business casual cottagecore, you know? But that's the way my mind works. I'm the one who made a plaid medieval hood out of, you know, a plaid wool. And yeah, I wear it every year. I wear it a lot, actually. Christmas time, wintertime, it gets cold. You put on the hood, you go out, you shovel the walks. I put little jingle bells on the end of my lyra pipe. It's great. So at some point, you never know. You may find me wandering around in a business casual willow top from Twig and Tail. Maybe. Or something else. I found 4 skeins of sock yarn. We'll take a look at these. This one is Indigo Moon. And then I found 3, count them, 3 Culinet Jitterbug. I think they'll be fantastic for learning how to use the circular sock machine. The thing is, I remember when both these brands were popular here in Calgary, and it was about the time that I started knitting. The label on the Indigo Moon says it came from Gina Brown's, which is a local yarn store, but I'm pretty sure I remember buying both this and the Jitterbug in my own colors at Make One Yarn Studio in Bridgeland, which is no longer in business. In fact, I used up this, and I still have the original Jitterbug that I'd found back then. I used up the Indigo Moon I'd purchased making socks for my dad. The Indigo Moon feels a little bit stiff in comparison to a lot of other sock yarns, and it could be the way that they were washed after drying. Dyeing. It could be the way that these were washed out after dyeing. Depends on how the dyer did the final wash. There we go. I remember that Dad's socks felt a lot better after they were washed and blocked. And I seem to recall someone way back when mentioning that you had to be careful with the Jitterbug as they'd had problems getting a full pair of socks out of them. So these might be socks to try on the sock machine with contrasting heels and toes from the leftover sock yarn stash. And that's all the yarn that I purchased. I snatched up the few nice skeins of sock yarn that I could find, and then I skedaddled. One of these bags is going to need to be replaced, probably this one, because the cat decided the bin was upstairs in the living room for a moment. The cat decided to fish it out and use it for a kicky bag. So, means that the cat needs a new kicky bag and I need to get a new bag for my yarn. No, where I overindulged was books. I picked up a bunch of Peytons and similar booklets collected together in Ziploc bags. So, these things. I also found a few similar pamphlets and booklets just loose, and this is one of them, and picked them up to add to the collection. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to really look through the baggies until I got them home and opened them up. It was a flat rate per baggie, so there are things in here that I don't particularly feel drawn to or that might be duplicates of things that I already own. But there are also plenty of other things that I think would be fun to try, or even just to have in the collection from an archival point of view. I can always pack up the things I don't need and take them to Women in Need or one of the other charitable thrift shops. Or save them for next year's Ujamaa Grandmas. I found a box with tatting and other miscellaneous crafts, and I yoinked these. And while I was perusing the contents of the box, someone else bustled up and did the whole, "Oh my, tatting, I've been wanting to learn that." And I think they figured that I'd just sort of clear out and let them take over. No, not a chance. Tatting books are harder to find, and at least one of these, this one, is in a collection I've been looking for. I have at least one other that I purchased digitally on Etsy, and another digital scan that I think came from the Antique Pattern Library, but I could be mistaken. I'm a sucker for a good doily. I call them anxiety doilies because the motions are repetitive and soothing. Basically, a good project when you're feeling anxious. So, yeah, if you are prone to feeling anxiety and knitting is not your speed, I definitely recommend tatting. So yes, there's New Things Happen to Tatting, which is from Coates. The Joy of Tatting by Mary Sue Kuhn. And Christmas Angels and Other Tatting Patterns by Monica Hahn. And then there were a few other books that caught my eye. A sock book by Hunter Hammerson. A book on costuming the TV series Mad Men. A smocking book, funnily enough, by a person with the last name of Knott. Grace L. Knott. I find it funny. The first book in one of those omnibus collections on sewing and crafting. These are great when you can get them. At some point I may see if there's a way I can get the rest of the collection because they're so very 1970s. I have a few vintage sewing and crafting books given to me or left to me by Mum, so I have a soft spot for them. Also, and this was a funny one. You've heard of the Bayeux tapestry, right? How about the black gold tapestry? I refuse to think that this was done more seriously than tongue-in-cheek. Because according to the front piece, The Black Gold Tapestry by Sandra Sawatsky, a contemporary 21st century work of art dramatizing the saga of oil through the power and beauty of embroidery. I am not going to make fun of the person's work. What I'm going to make fun of is the oil and gas culture in Alberta. Because, yeah, it's bad. Not the embroidery. The embroidery is great. The culture is bad. Needless to say, I'm one of the people who signed the petition to stay in Canada. And now the big purchase. And I had to get some B-roll of this because I'm not dragging it downstairs. But I bought a sewing machine. And I'm just going to preface this by saying I've been really privileged and fortunate when it comes to my sewing machines. I grew up with a mother who sewed, who really wanted a daughter who sewed, and I think was just relieved that I like cross-stitch and figured out knitting in my early 30s. I did a little costuming in my late 20s, early 30s, and she gave me my first machine, which is currently sitting on the floor down there. It's a Kenmore that I think might have come through her from my grandmother, but I can't feel 100% certain of that. The handwriting in the booklet definitely looks like it belongs to my mother, though Mum did use a lot of hand-me-down machines herself. When I started sewing in earnest, my mother-in-law handed down her mother's machine, right here, a Pfaff Tiptronic from the late 90s. The husband's maternal grandmother was an avid quilter, and the Pfaff has a lot of bells and whistles perfect for that. She also handed down her old serger because she'd stopped sewing and had no further use for it. It needed some cleaning and could probably use even more, but despite the amount of complaining I do about it and its quirks, it is a good machine. My mother-in-law also found my white rotary treadle machine at a neighbor's, I believe, and they were just happy someone would want it. I've used it, it works, now that I've got a couple of new belts for it. And it's a little stiff, probably needs a bit of oil, but it's otherwise in good condition. Unfortunately, well, it's in the area that got rained on. Luckily, it did not get rained on. It was in a section that was kind of out of the way of the water, and I then moved it, thankfully. But otherwise, you've been seeing it acting as a side table and holding up a lamp whenever I've been over there. So, yeah, it's currently not in its power form as a sewing machine. I also have a vintage to antique electric sewing machine in a cabinet that came from the husband's paternal grandmother's estate. It's appeared in the background of some of my earlier videos. I haven't been able to use it yet, as you can just feel the electricity rolling off of it when you plug it in, and I'm not sure if the issue is the motor, the power cord, or the knee pedal. It could be any of them. It could be the way that they're attached. I think that right now the electrical tape is doing some pretty heavy lifting. So I've picked up a new motor with a foot pedal, and I'll be installing it soon so I can try it out. I have a feeling that the updated plugins will be a world of difference. This machine, which I will refer to as the Peerless, is an interesting bit of history. The name Peerless makes me think it's a white machine, as in white rotary, but it's definitely a Singer 15 body. It's certainly a straight stitch only machine, but I'm not sure if it can do reverse, so I'll be checking that out once I've oiled it and switched out the motor. Otherwise, she's in great condition. I think I'm going to enjoy playing around with her. With that out of the way, I bought a Singer 99K. It's the same general model that Bianca the Closet Historian uses. Now, I didn't buy it just because of Bianca. The 99K is an extremely sturdy machine that will do excellent bare bones sewing and was manufactured in enough quantity that if you need replacement parts, they're somewhat available. And because they're built as a smaller version of the Singer 15, there's a lot of compatibility. So I'd gone to Ujamaa Grandma's with my friends Nancy and Ashley, and Ashley was the first to see the table full of 99Ks. And I think it amused Nancy to see the two of us buzzing around that table like a couple of bees in a garden, trying to decide if we wanted one, if we could afford one, which one we'd want. Ashley had a hard decision between a black 99K and one that was painted green with a Red Cross badge on it. I think it was the Red Cross badge, not the aviation badge. I think we both left with a black 99K. I know mine's a 1956 model. I can't remember which one Ashley picked up. It was a whole major discussion with us trying to decide which machine would go home with whom, with Nancy throwing in questions like, do you think you'll actually use it? Which is a valid question because it's the same one the husbeast asked when I texted him a picture with the words, I can has? Now, the reason I went over my current machine collection, which is about 5 machines more than I ever thought I'd own, let alone want, is because sewing was my mother's hobby. She spent so many years using whatever machine she could get her hands on because money was always tight and dreamed of the day she could afford a brand new machine. One with all the things she wanted where she was the one and only owner ever. And she realized that dream just before she retired, but she didn't have a serger or any other fancy machines. She was a little jealous of the Pfaff, even though she'd just bought the Kenmore, which I found funny, but on the whole was just happy to not be using an old hand-me-down machine. So the first machine I spent money on for myself being a vintage Singer? Absolutely hilarious. Though, to be fair, when Mum found out that I had the white rotary treadle and liked vintage machines, she mentioned she'd been kicking herself for not asking my paternal grandmother for her Singer treadle in cabinet. I remember always seeing it in its table form with a bunch of projects and mending piled on it, and it never occurred to me that Granny's everyday machine was something that we would now consider an antique. And that was in the 1980s. It was old even then. It was just a part of the general household landscape. For all I know, she had a more current machine that she'd just use on the sewing table, the way that I used to perch the faff on the Peerless's cabinet before I received the sewing table built by the husband's grandfather for the faff, just right below it. But my memory's a little hazy when it comes to things that happened over 40 years ago. I suspect, though, that if my granny didn't actually use the treadle, it probably would have been stored in the garage with all of the other old things my grandparents were storing, rather than in the living space of the house, which is where I remember seeing it. But back to the 99K. I haven't had a chance to use it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. The tag mentioned that it was in good condition, and the volunteers working in that area seemed to think it was perfectly fine. We'll find that out soon enough. If I need to, I'll do another motor swap, but I suspect that's not going to be a problem. There was a gentleman helping in that area who, while he hadn't worked on those specific machines, apparently services and restores old sewing machines, and he sounded very confident about the condition the machines were in. I asked if he'd be able to take a look at the Peerless, and he lives over toward the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan, so a little too far to go for sewing machine service. It's a few hours away. The 99K came with the zipper foot, which is fantastic. With the 99K and the Peerless both being low shank compatible machines, I can use the small box of presser feet that came with the Peerless on both. Oddly enough, the presser foot missing from the collection that came with the Peerless, zipper foot. I might play with the ruffler foot or the rolled hem, but I suspect I'll be using the standard and zipper feet most. I also think that the Kenmore, which is down there, is also low shank compatible, and if that's the case, I picked up a couple of adapters a while back so I could use more modern presser feet with both it and the faff, so I have no end of cool straight stitch toys that I can play with. And straight stitch just means no zigzag. Neither the 99K nor the Peerless can zigzag, which means no knit fabrics, and if I want a seam finish, I'm looking at pre- or post-serging, pinking, French seams, or flat felling. Lots of options, just no zigzag. There was a hand crank attachment next to the machine, and I wish I'd asked if I could have it. Nobody seemed to know which machine it belonged to, and I don't recall there being a price tag on it, but it would have been nice to have as a backup. The cool thing about the 99K, or at least this one, is that it's really versatile. Because it's belt driven, it can be used with a motor, a treadle, or a crank. I considered swapping it into the Peerless's cabinet, but it's too small. The 99K is a 3/4 size machine, and the Peerless is a full size 15. I'm okay with the 99K being in the case box. It means that if I want a basic machine for traveling, say I somehow managed to afford a motorhome, perfect machine for stowing away in the camper, or going to a friend's house for the afternoon. Also, with the versatility of a hand crank, if you can find one and being built like a tank, perfect basic machine for the zombie apocalypse. Just saying. It's just portability that's a problem. She's not exactly light, but you know, enough quilting cotton and stabilizer, you can make a bag for that. The husband and I are planning to rearrange a couple of rooms on the second floor so that I can have an office, and I'm thinking that the 2 vintage electric machines will go up there. The Peerless cabinet makes a fantastic side table, and if I want to sew something on a casual basis, maybe a couple of project bags, I can do any serging in the basement and bring the pieces up to my office so I can see a little sunlight while I sew. I'm kind of excited at the prospect. So that's my Ujamaa Grandma's Thrift haul for 2026. A bit of fabric, a little yarn, lots of books, and my first sewing machine bought by me. So I think that's where I'm going to leave things for this episode. Got a pair of socks that I need to finish, a pair of socks that I need to figure out, particularly if I'm using the circular sock machine, which is where these guys will come in handy for testing purposes, and got a whole bunch of stuff that I need to put away. I'll see you next time.